Thanks. It's very exciting to get to that point. I think it's going to be fine. The conference, I mean. Okay, so the title of this session, we were contemplating between a couple of titles, evaluation of visualization and so on. The one that stuck, but we haven't actually used, was the dark side of visualization, which I kind of like. So as far as I'm concerned, that is the title of the session. And I'm going to talk about disinformation visualization, how to lie with ZerAviv. A bit about the background of this research. I found myself in a pretty weird position when I was invited to give guest critiques in somewhere else for a data visualization class, and one by one I saw the students coming up and showing their initial and let's say raw experiments in the wild world of data visualization, and really trying to convince us, and even worse, convince themselves that there's like amazing insight there. And there wasn't enough, and I felt like, oh, on one hand I want to say there are problems here and problems there, but basically I felt like we were putting them in a position that was setting them up to fail, and an academic environment can actually enjoy experiments, the kind of other experiments, like instead of teaching students how to tell the truth with data, teach students how to lie with data, and then that would help them understand the biases of data visualization. And it started as a workshop, and I've gotten to give this workshop in a couple of places, including here in Shankar, and from that a presentation and a paper. So that's the background. So anybody identifies this? This is the world, but this is also a very specific photograph. Anybody identifies it? iPhone, nice, love it. This is the blue marble. It's true, it's the same picture. The blue marble, this picture has gotten the name blue marble. It's the first photograph of the Earth in its when it's completely lit from space. It was taken by the Apollo 17. If I'm not mistaken, it was 72 or 73. And when the astronauts came back to Earth with the film, that was film back then, they produced the picture, and that's what they got. What's wrong with this picture? It's upside down. It's upside down. Well, is it upside down? But yeah, when they looked at that picture and they said, oh, that we can't publish that. And what they did is they switched it around. They switched it around, and this is the actual picture that NASA published, because this is the right way to see the world. Or rather, that is the way we got used to seeing the world. And that is the way that emphasizes what our expectations of how should the world look from space, right? But why should the world look like that? Why shouldn't it look like that? There's nothing scientifically wrong about an upside down, so-called upside down picture of the world. The south doesn't need to be in the bottom, and the north doesn't need to be at the top. This is a construct of the way we've been drawing maps. This is a construct of visualization of the world. But who raise your hand if you're willing to change the map right now to this? Really? Like this is, when I look at this, it looks perverted. Like there's something so strong about the fixation of the image of the world. This is more than an icon. This is like looking at a face and seeing something like the eyes are not where they're supposed to be, or it's so fundamentally ingrained within our perspective of the world, and this is a graphic image, right? A graphic image that only had its photographic or slightly, and by photographic I mean slightly more scientific evidence, I would say like 40 years ago, right? So that's interesting. So the DIKW model for knowledge is based on this idea of, at the basis we have data, and then on top of it information, knowledge, and wisdom. And what it means is that the data would be, for example, red. What red? Red, just red. The meaning could be, when it gets meaning, it becomes information, and then the red could mean south-facing traffic light on corner of Pitt and George Streets has turned red. If you add to that context, which means how does this information, what do I have to do with this information? The traffic light I am driving towards has turned red. So now I'm in the picture as well. And knowledge, information, and data are all about the past. And now we're talking about the future. So applied, I'd better stop the car. Or if you're in Israel, I'd better speed up. So when we understand that this model is based on what are the decisions and what are the actions that we're going to take in the future, then it's obvious that there's a lot of interest involved. So getting to the top of the pyramid should be very contested, because there's a lot of people or interest that would want you to get to the tip of the pyramid that would be somewhere else. So every step of the way makes the reading of the data different, and that is and climbing up the DIKW model. The DIKW pyramid is one of the main reasons to do data visualization. So in our little kind of live experiment in line with data, we'll use the separation of content, structure, and presentation. Content would be everything that we could say. Structure would be what we chose to say, the editing, what we took from that data set, or that data set, we put it together, and presentation would be the visual representation, or the visual representation, the styling. So even styling of language can be thought of as presentation, and there was some discussions of presentation. For the more technical here in the room, the content you put in a database, structures you build with template like PHP or Python or whatever, Node.js, right? Okay, and the presentation would be the CSS. Okay, if we're talking web technology. So let's start with lying with the content. So just to put it straight, I'm not talking about lying as saying things that are wrong. I'm trying to think of how can we lie with the truth. So the truth can be manipulative. When we're doing the workshops, I ask students to misrepresent themselves. Tell us something true about themselves that is actually misleading. And you've all done that. Just look at your bios. We're true to the data and false to reality. This is our rule. So just a quick show of hands, should the killing of babies be legalized? Should the killing of babies be legalized? Yeah? Yeah, people like babies here. Okay, so let me try another question. Should women have the right to their own body? Okay, so people like women more than they like babies. Or I could ask it in another way. Should abortion be legal? Yeah. So this could be different levels of different ways of asking the same question. Some people would argue that the way I formalized the first question is equal to this. Some would argue against that, but obviously the kind of results that we would get from asking these three different questions would be different. So even when we're talking about data, and it's not only poll data, it's every type of data, you can't really look, there's nothing, raw data is an oxymoron. Like, there is no raw data. Data is always produced. So we got that out of the way. Let's get into structure, the editing. So we're still in abortion, and when Gallup has tried to poll Americans about this question, they framed the question using this language. With respect to the abortion issue, would you consider yourself to be pro-choice or pro-life? These are the two terms used in the American debate. This is one of the biggest political and cultural debates in the US. And it's very, very polarizing. Pro-choice being pro-abortion, pro-life being against abortion. There is no against here. It's just pro and pro. And the results they got are pretty obvious. You could see it in this table, right? Yeah, you can't really read the table very fast and understand the inside of it. That's why we have visualization, and that's why they made this graph. And now you understand it much faster. So as you can see, in the mid-50s, most of America, by a large amount, has been pro-choice. Pro-life has been growing. Pro-choice has been deteriorating to the level of, I would say, fluctuation since the end of the 90s. But you could also say, strong shift in opinion on abortion, because that would sell the paper much better. And this is a title. This is from the AP, quoting the exact same Gallup poll. Adding a title and adding annotation that actually directs a certain way of reading the same graph. There are stylistic differences as well, but let's move on, because when we look at the same study as reported by liveaction.org, it looks like this. So there's no title here, but you see what's going on. If you're pro-choice, you're losing. If you're pro-life, you're winning. Any more manipulation that you can see here, or something that... Okay, timeline, zero base, color. The color is kind of weird because it doesn't correspond with liberal and conservative. But anything else that you might notice?
The y-axis is partial.
Okay, the y-axis is partial. Okay, so Yaron only now noticed the age. So this is not the full data. This is abortion views 18 to 29 years old. They chose to only look at the data that they got from people responding from the age of 18 to 29. Most of you have not even read that. And if you have read it, you're kind of glancing over it. Oh, 18 to 29, I shouldn't worry about it. I guess that's the age where when people get abortions, which is not true, right? So this is specific sampling of the data, the truthful data, but a very specific sampling of the data that gives you this specific image. And I used the same graph with the actual white data without this filtering, and this is what I got. It's much less conclusive, plus I added another time, another breakpoint, and you can see that this is far from being as dramatic as it looked before. So there's nothing wrong about the way the data is represented here, and still it's manipulative. And just following the same poll going forward, you can see the fluctuation has continued since and still continues. This is something that that America is still, U.S. still split on abortion. The titles of we're seeing a graph going up, which is obvious that it would continue going up, right? Because this is kind of the velocity of the graph going in that direction. Yes. Yeah, and another point that about this, the sample size was very selective as well. They also chose not to talk about the 90s at all. Yeah.
No mention of how many people were asked.
Well, they do reference the Gallup poll, which is a pretty credible source. So moving on to the fun part, this is presentation. This is the aesthetic part. This is where the most manipulation can happen, and as lively as we can. We're still in the field of abortion. So this is from livecitizen.org. Abortion in the United States. So let's just look at the world. There's like 7 billion people in the world, 133 million per year, and you can see that a mother that gives birth is a mother that is kind of a very basic icon that carries a baby, and there's a carriage, a baby carriage next to it. I don't know why, but it's there. And then, how would you represent abortions? Like objectively, if not by this this mashup of toilet women, recycling, and fetuses. Okay, like throw the baby. 42 millions per year. So and if you just look at how many people, how many mothers are throwing their babies into the garbage in the world in comparison to how many mothers are throwing their babies to the garbage in the US. So apparently the two left women, the brown one and the turquoise one, they're American, right? So that's like almost a third of babies being aborted in the world are American. Oh, actually, the mothers at the top are 10 million each, and the mothers at the bottom are 1 million each. Well, you could have read the labeling. You know, it's not manipulative. It's just you not reading. So. There are so many chunks of data that you're just going one after the other and after the other, and you're expected to invest some critical thinking when there's so many data points going one after the other, one after the other, one after the other, and can you really think about critically about these data points when you have 4 colorful baby-throwing mothers just on the bottom, and why? And who are these evil mothers that throw their babies to the garbage? So you see that there are 30. Most of the U.S. are white, 69%, but the amount of abortion is equal between white and black, because black mothers loves the babies much less, right? Same with the Hispanic and the so-called other. I would say the other. They chose to look at it through race, as if this is the right question. This is again coming back to the question of asking the question. And even more interesting over here, what are the reasons for abortion? So only 1% rape and incest, 6% potential health problems, and let's just call all of the other categories the 93% of social reasons. And you're probably asking yourself, what do they mean by social reasons? So they were kind enough to give us an example. The child is unwanted or inconvenient. right? There might be other categories there, but these are the ones, they kind of represent the rest. They could have chosen to show us the results by socioeconomic condition, but I guess it wouldn't have told the story the way they wanted. So by now, you figured out that the conservative right is manipulative, and probably the left is wholesome and honest. Yeah, no, not really. So this is a very powerful poster, and as soon as I saw this poster, I was like, I loved it. It was conforming to my perspective. It was telling making a point in a very elegant way. For every person who dies in a terrorist attack globally, 58 people in the US die due to lack of healthcare. Invade a hospital. So we see 58 skulls, more than we can count, which is also powerful. And we can see only one little cute skull, that is the terrorist skull. And in our strong kind of pattern recognition, both visually and culturally, we see health, we see death, we see a mass, we see bright colors, we see seduction. The answer is no healthcare equals worse than terrorism. The subtext is you're being terrorized by denial of healthcare. The subtext is we will terrorize you to convince you that you need healthcare. There are manipulations here on every level. On the data level, who even defines who dies from terrorism, and who even defines who dies from lack of potential healthcare? So I dug in, and I found out that the State Department defines who's a terrorist globally, and before 9/11, or before the invasion of Iraq, they were counting much more deaths as deaths from terrorist attacks, and then after the invasion, they were counting much less to prove that they're winning. So you count in one way if you want to make the case for the war, and you count in a different way if you're trying to create a different case. And when it comes to who dies from lack of healthcare, the numbers actually came from an organization that is trying to advocate for healthcare. So are they the right broker for this data? The kind of sampling, taking both data sets, what do these data sets even have in common? Why are they both there? And visually, you know, this little skull kind of, to me, it looks more like maybe a pirate skull. And the mass of many scary skulls together, to me, it looks like a mass grave. So this is a very sophisticated manipulation that is really going, in my book, above lines to drive its story. And one of the leading thinkers that was quoted with a more and less snarky tone before is Edward Tufte, depends on, I don't know, Tuft or Tufte? Tufte, right? Okay. So he has a book called Beautiful Evidence, and he presents this dog that jumps and hits the water. And when he's defining what he means by beautiful evidence, he quotes a colleague of Galileo, Francesco Cesi, who wrote that Galileo's 38 hand-drawn images of sunspots delight both by the wonder of the spectacle and the accuracy of expression. And for him, this is what he means by beautiful evidence. This moment when the truth meets beauty in this perfect way. And to be fair, Tufte is very, very critical of manipulative visualization. But at the same time, he proposes this term, beautiful evidence. And I would say to think of evidence of visualization as evidence is really wrong, because it's actually masquerading as evidence. It's seductive and manipulative. I would say it's a beautiful argument. And an argument is legitimate. It's not like we don't need arguments, or arguments are always manipulative. Let's talk about the kind of visualizations that we can see. There's the explanatory visualization that explains something through a visual representation. There's the exploratory, and we talked a lot about visual analysis. And there's the exhibitionary, mainly visualizations that are there to create a nice picture. There are different levels of legitimacy to each one of the approaches, depending on the context. But when we're talking about the explanatory, what does it try to explain? Is it an apolitical message, like a dog hitting water makes a splash? Or is it depoliticizing a message? The correlation of race and socioeconomics affects abortion rates. And that is a critical point. So when we're talking about data visualization, we have reality on one corner, which we experience mainly visually. And we have data on the other corner, which is the construct of language. We would many try to imagine this imaginary, objective, apolitical line that goes directly between reality and data, but it doesn't really exist. What about graphics? Well, the graphics are really way up there in the pyramid, very, very far from this imaginary, objective line. They are the construct of visual language. The visual the experience visually like you experience reality, but they're a construct of language just like data. So for graphics to be up there is presented as this kind of a problem for data visualization, because it needs to be closer to this line, to this direct line between reality and data. So what happens is that we're pushing graphics down there. There's a technocratic and scientific tendency that strive for better understanding, better collaboration, common ground. But in its core, it's a fantasy. It's not what images should or even could do. The result is an apolitical common ground. It's not an apolitical common ground, but a depoliticization and often even propaganda. So instead of pushing graphics up there in what I would define as disambiguation, and this word disambiguation is very interesting. The first time I encountered it repeatedly was in Wikipedia. When you go into a Wikipedia article, you go to a disambiguation page when the term is not defined. You have to disambiguate this term, because we cannot stand ambiguity. There's no room for ambiguity in computer land. And you have to decide it's this or that. I don't think that's the role of the visual. I think ambiguity is very important within visual culture. And there's a certain problem when we're presenting visuals as if they are disambiguated. In a way, if we need to do something, is to get graphics back to where they belong, kind of re-ambiguation. There's room for ambiguity even if we're using data, in parallel to using data. If we take data and turn it into a part of language, into a part of discourse, we can still enjoy knowledge, we can still enjoy a common ground, but not expect this fantasy of a straight line between reality and data. Because the world we live in doesn't look like this. It's not a seamless world. It's this modernist canonical fantasy of seamless representation, and it works perfectly with our vector graphics. But the world, if to use a metaphor, looks much more like this. It's a seamful world. And I would offer to consider this more modest and honest, simple approach that does not pretend to be perfect and does not hide the fallible human process and the biases embedded in visual speech. Thank you.
Questions?
I very much appreciate the biases, and we had another presentation on that too. It's without knowing, having full knowledge of the situation, it's very hard to detect them. So, because there are no signals there, no red flags. So if I know something's on Fox News, I should not pay attention to it. But that's my own bias, right? So it's very hard to pick up those things. I think that may be some of your point.
Well, that's basically what I'm trying to get to. It's like we have this fantasy that there is a place with no bias, and maybe data culture is that place. We constantly strive there, and then we lower our guards. In a way, there's another problem there because we're there's a lot of people in the room that use that have the tools to speak with data, to turn the representation of data into a part of their speech, and that's what I think it is. It's speech.
Oh, sure.
But not all of us have it. And when we're talking about graphicacy and visual literacy and so on. There's a problem when one side has the tools and the other one don't have the tools to speak back. So what I'm trying to argue, and it's an argument, that we should look at visualization as an argument. An argument is a very valuable tool in society. It's not something that is automatically a lie. It is an argument, and when I'm making an argument, you can see that I'm using a certain style choices, and I'm using this word and not that word, and so on. But I'm not. But I'm not speaking the word of God, right? I'm not spewing truth through my words or my images. And we can identify it with speech because we can all speak. But we don't identify it as clearly with images because we can't all create these images. And that's where the problem is.
Well, I think the problem in a way is deeper, and that's that by the time we're presenting data in bar graphs or line graphs or however we're presenting it, it looks like facts, not like claims. And again, we're used to being suspicious of language. Right? You might say pro-life, and I'd say, right to life or right to abortion, and that already identifies us politically as one side or another. But it's just I'm not sure there's a way that we can do the same with bar graphs and line graphs.
I think I would like to think that we're currently in a transition, because the reason we're here in this conference and have so many different practices in the room is because something is happening with the visualization right now that is becoming so important into the public debate that the power is really getting stronger. I think as practitioners and as researchers, we need to actually lead because we understand the biases and we understand the context for which to read visualization. We need to lead by example and saying by presenting this as a part of as an argument rather than an evidence. It's not the smoking gun or the knife at the back. Something that you can't argue with. It should be something to argue with. And if it would be something to argue with, we can actually get the best out of it and to really challenge the data, to really challenge its representation, and to get the best out of this, of what visualization has to offer.
Anybody else?
Hi there, thanks.
I'm going to combine two fields. We were talking about this at the break. I come from animated documentaries, okay? And I think, in a way, we're both dealing with something very similar because, of course, in documentaries, it's an argument. There is no objective truth either. But because in documentaries, we're so used to associating the representation with photography, that becomes a starting point. And therefore, when you use animation, it alerts viewers to that sense of interpretation. Whereas you're talking about data visualization, and I think in a way, people are maybe more accustomed to receiving numerical data within these graphics. And I was wondering, and that maybe makes them less aware of the manipulations made through the visuals. And I was wondering if you could say something about just the fact that we're used to getting numerical data in a certain way, but other information in that way.
So what I like about even this idea of animated documentaries is that, as you said, it's kind of pointing. You know where animation is coming from. It's a form of art first and foremost, and Steamboat Willie, right? Not frontline, and that is a healthy way of looking at a statement and at an argument. And that is something that animated documentaries do. They remind you of the human perspective. Now, the history of data visualization is very much rooted in the science, and with all of the allure that comes around it. And it's still, practiced quite widely, even growing within the sciences. But it's expanding more and more and more into our everyday life and our representation in very different fields. But it still carries with it the baggage, the cultural baggage of this is science. And even if science is to be argued with, it should be argued by scientists, not by me. And that's what I'm trying to say. That if we want to make visualization relevant to wider fields of culture, we need to separate at least a bit this culture of scientific debate, or contextualize it or expand it.
Well, this will be the last question for this session.
Hey. First of all, thanks, Mushon. It's amazing, and it's really debatable, this topic. But I want to ask you, as an educator, I feel that data visualization becoming to be more and more popular, not just because of technology, it's because of the generation, the younger generation than us, let's say, that kind of used to visual communication, emojis and sport, showing statistic as the main event, not the game itself, and so on. Do you feel that this is a matter of the next generation that need to be raised into understand that this is the right way to argue with each other based on facts and based on statistic or visualization, or it's a matter of technology?
Well, I think it's a matter. The reason it's important for me to make this point here is because I think it's a part of our role to make sure that that visualization serves the role it needs to serve in culture. To expand its use within discourse. And I'll give you an example. In the public knowledge workshop, we're working now on a feature in the open budget in the OBudget site to allow people to create tours through the data, to tell stories. There's this debate between storytelling and the data worlds, and it's kind of two sides kind of arguing from both sides, and we're trying to say we can have stories within worlds, and you can look at the data within its seemingly neutral representation, or a representation that doesn't try to tell you what to think about it immediately, and you can tell your own story there. Just point at this data point, point at that data point, take me to another to another item, maybe take me to another site, and tell me how are you looking at this data, and then I'll let you know how I'm looking at this data. So even if it's not about different representations or immediately giving everybody all of the tools for representation, inviting people to debate and to use visualization not as an evidence but as a context for a conversation.
Great, thank you very much. Really very interesting